You're listening to episode 96, Carrie's Story, a son with Spina Bifida and Hydrocephalus. Hello, my friends. Happy Thanksgiving week. I don't know where this is finding you, if you are traveling on the way to go visit family, if you are working this holiday, if you are in the hospital, if you are quarantining, but wherever this finds you, I just want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And I hope you know that I, Katie Taylor, am so grateful that you are here and a part of this podcast and community, and just eternally grateful for you being here. So I'm also so happy that today I have a very special episode with Carrie Holt. And Carrie is one of those people that when you talk to her, A, you feel like you've known her your whole life, and B, it just feels like you're in the room with her. It feels like you've known her. She's got this little twang and just such a great perspective on what it's like to have a child with a diagnosis and special needs. So because it is Thanksgiving, and I'm going to get to Carrie's story very quickly. I know that some of you like to just directly skip to the story, and I totally get it. But I also love sharing a little bit about myself whenever I can, because I feel like I have so many families that are just so vulnerable and opening up, and I like to do that too. So, I'm going to share with you what I am grateful for. I'm going to share just 3 things. We had the gratitude journal episode last week, a quick 12-minute talk when we learned how to start and continue a gratitude journal with kiddos. So I thought I would share with you 3 things that I'm grateful for. And that is with the caveat that I am eternally grateful always for the parents and moms and dads and grandparents that share their stories on this podcast, and for everybody who listens. So that goes without saying. I'm so grateful for you. The first thing I want to say that I'm grateful for is my dad. He and I have always been very similar sense of humors. We like to burp really loud. We like to make jokes. We like to have fun. We're a little messy. We're very similar. And he's always been someone who puts his family first, and even his distant cousins will tell you that they feel close to Jim Donovan. It's pretty amazing. I have this story about when I went to Penn State University, which I've mentioned before, but I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And so I was about to board a flight to go back to college, and there was a plane crash that happened, I think it was in Arkansas, on the same kind of plane that I was about to get on. Obviously not the same plane, but it was the same design. And I already have plane anxiety. I get very anxious on flights. And do y'all know what my dad did? He got in the car and he drove me 24 hours to Penn State, and then 24 hours back home. It's always hit me, even this many years later, what a selfless act that was. And there was no question, there was no guilt, there was no, it's just, he's the best guy. And over the past few months, I've got to work with him more closely as he's, got the business kind of side of management experience and building Child Life on Call. And I'm so grateful for this time with him. Second, I just want to say I'm so grateful for my Instagram friends. It's like they are I've never met so many of you, but you know who you are, and we like each other's photos, and we comment, and we send DMs, and it's like a whole little community, and I'm so grateful for them and for you. And the last thing I am going to say I'm grateful for is alone time. I feel so clear and level-headed after I just spend a little time alone, and so I'm grateful for that today. Okay, enough about me. I'm so sorry for the long intro, but I wanted to share a bit. So let's get started with Carrie's story. She is the podcast host of Take Heart Special Mom, so I know you're going to want to go listen to that, and let's get started. So why don't you just start off and talk to us a bit about you and your family and where you guys come from and a little bit of background about you.
Sure. So my name is Carrie Holt, and I have been married to my husband, Bruce, for 21 years, and we have 4 just great kids. So we have 3 boys and a daughter. My oldest son is 18, and then I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old, and then an 11-year-old daughter. So unfortunately, she is the baby, and she has three older protective brothers looking after her. And we live north of Columbus, Ohio.
Oh my gosh, she's so lucky. Like she may not feel it now, having
Right.
three older brothers, but in time it pays off, I'm sure.
Yes, it does. Yes.
So, Carrie, why don't you talk to us a little bit about who we're going to be speaking about today? And if you can take us back to that initial time that everything kind of got started in your journey.
Sure. So I'll set the stage a little bit. So we had a 3-year-old son and an 18-month-old son, and I was 20 weeks pregnant with our third baby. I went in for our routine 20-week ultrasound, and of course, you usually find out the gender and all, that everything is okay. And after I had my ultrasound done by a tech, and that was the first time I had ever had that happen. Normally, my doctor did my ultrasounds. I think the practice was getting bigger. And my husband said that he could tell she was spending a lot of time and she wasn't saying a whole lot, but I was pretty oblivious to it. I think, thankfully, just her pauses and things like that. And so afterward, we were in the waiting room, and I had an appointment to see my doctor. I had scheduled both things together. Thankfully, I had not gone home because I know other families that have done that. And my husband was kind of pacing because, in an OB office, you wait forever. and I said to him, I would tell you to just go to work, but I feel like you need to be here. And I really did not have a feeling of doom and gloom, but for some reason, I just felt like he should be there. Our oldest son was with us too at the time. So we go into the room, and my doctor comes in, and Bruce said just by the way her face looked, he could tell something was wrong. And of course, the first words out of her mouth were, "We found something wrong with the baby. We're not sure what it is." And I remember her actually saying, "We don't think it's spina bifida," which is my son's condition. The ultrasounds weren't super clear, but they found hydrocephalus. So hydrocephalus is basically extra fluid in the brain, and it's almost always associated with spina bifida. So spina bifida, the scientific name is myelomeningocele, and really what that means is just a split or open spine. So it occurs before a mom even really sometimes knows she's even pregnant, and the bones don't fuse around the spinal cord, and it leaves an open hole in the back. It can occur really anywhere along the spinal cord, and I always share with people when I'm speaking that it's similar to a spinal cord injury, a paralysis of the spine. So my son's is in the lumbar region, the lower part of the back. It affects muscles, it affects bowel and bladder, and spina bifida is considered a snowflake diagnosis where just no two kids are alike. You can, have kids that walk with just ankle braces, and kids that need braces up to their hips, and kids that use wheelchairs full time. And so it was pretty devastating. It was August 31st. Like, I always call that my D-Day, diagnosis day. Like, just it marked a clear before and after of just a complete change in our lives. It was pretty devastating too at the time.
I can imagine, and just so surprising too. That's a moment that we talk a lot about on the podcast, is that ultrasound at 20 weeks, and just exactly what you're describing. Like, from that point on, things are different. And tell me about how you handled that second half of the pregnancy. Like, what was that like for you?
So I remember it being just really hard. I remember feeling like, so later that day, we ran our older son home to our friend who was watching our younger son, and in the room, my husband actually, his blood pressure dropped and he almost passed out. We actually laugh about it now because we've had several scenarios along our journey, and I am allowed to share this with his permission, where he, like, the next thing I know, he was laying on the floor and his feet were on my doctor's shoulders. And of
Oh
course,
my gosh.
I'm crying. And so she opened the door and had the nurse come get our oldest son. And take him to go get a sucker or something so he doesn't have this trauma. He said he doesn't remember it, thankfully. But yeah, so she immediately was able to get us in that day to a high risk doctor, level 2 ultrasound. And then, so from then on, I was treated as high risk, and I had multiple ultrasounds, and I just remember feeling like just very disconnected, that my son was just a diagnosis. We had not, with our previous 2 pregnancies, we always like to be surprised by finding out the gender. And this time, of course, we found out. And then I had an amniocentesis, which was something I was just deathly afraid of. I sometimes talk about, I kind of have an unbucket list as a special needs parent. And this was one of those things. Like,
oh my gosh, that's such a good way to put it, an unbucket list.
Yes. The list of things that you just never want to experience as a mom, as a special needs mom.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the amniocentesis confirmed all of the things and confirmed we were having a boy. And I just remember that people would ask me questions. I would be in Babies R Us, and they would say, "Oh, when are you due?" And I would think, I'm a very detail-oriented person. So I would think, well, I no longer have really a due date. I have a surgery date for me because I have to have a C-section, and a surgery date for my son because he has to have surgery the day he's born, and he's going to be transported to a different hospital in our town, in our city. You can't have your baby in the same hospital where your child needs care, like surgery. I mean, we've got good NICUs, but so he was not even going to be in the same hospital with me. And he was going to have surgery to close the open hole. He was going to have surgery to place a shunt, which is the device that treats that hydrocephalus, the extra fluid in the brain. So everything just became very medical, mechanical. And I distinctly remember one of the days I was in for a level 2 ultrasound. And at that time, this was in 2006, I don't really remember exactly, but I remember her saying, well, we have this 3D feature now. I don't remember when 3D ultrasounds kind of became a thing, but she's like, so let's try this out today. I'm kind of training on this, and I need to do this. And that day was the day that I finally started to bond with our baby.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at the pictures after and going, oh, look, he has our oldest son's nose, and he has the profile, of our boys. And that was when I started to connect with our baby more than just a diagnosis and a bunch of medical procedures that were coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and that point of the Babies R Us conversation is there's no small talk. It's all big talk.
Yes.
It's there's no easy answer that you can fit inside this little hallway conversation.
Yes.
And I think a lot of parents feel that way. They're like, I almost have to lie and just, because if I told you the truth, we'd be standing here for 3 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's so true.
So talk to me about kind of that whole bonding process and having 2 older kiddos at that time. And he was born, you had surgery yourself. And this is something I really try to remind other clinicians that I work with is, we're focused on the baby right at the beginning, right? But this mom has just gone through surgery, and we're asking her to, come into the NICU or come into this other room and get up and walk around. It's when you think about it, there's no other surgery where you're expected so much from you right after it's over.
Right. I just remember just trying so hard to fight all the fear that was coming, the fear over how are we going to handle this, and how is this going to turn their life upside down. And I knew a little bit about Spina Bifida. I had a younger girl in a class that I teach at our local church, And I had known her since she was 9, so I knew a little bit about the condition. And one of the biggest things I knew was that she had a lot of surgeries. She has had more surgeries than any person that I know. And that has since been the case for our son. I maybe could talk about this in a little bit, but our son ended up going through kind of a worst case scenario after he was born, kind of rare circumstances for his condition, which even turned us down even a road less traveled. But I just remember I'm a type A planner. And so the best ways that I could just handle this and then think about, bonding with him and taking care of him was just to prepare myself and educate myself the best way possible about his condition. I read a book about Spina Bifida that was written by a doctor. And in some ways that book was great because it kind of prepared me for this worst case scenario that happened later on. Because it was kind of like, oh, here's, they're just stating the facts about damage to the brain and what can happen with the nerves and the brainstem and its breathing issues and swallowing issues and all of this stuff. I remember being really intent on, I wanted to nurse this baby. So I researched pumping and got, rented a medical grade pump from our lactation center here in Columbus. And I remember this was, pre cell phones and, my parents, were down to obviously stay with our older 2 boys. And my dad went and took pictures of Toby in the NICU before they transported him and ran to a 1-hour photo place.
Aww.
So I would have these pictures so I could look at my baby while I pumped.
No.
Yeah. So those were and I do remember asking the hospital, can you please put me on the end away from the nursery and away from, the other moms and all of that, because I just don't want to be near them. One great thing about our hospitals here, and I know this isn't like this everywhere because Spina Bifida is the most common permanently disabling birth defect in the United States. And they allowed me the next day to be released from our hospital and be transported over so I could see him and hold him for a little while and all of that. Now I went back to my hospital because I had a C-section and I was a hot mess. I needed pain meds and just the day was just really awful. But it was still just amazing that they let me go and hold him and be with him. Yeah. And they let our boys in too at the time in the NICU. My mom took our boys up and, she helped them draw pictures and they were in his incubator and all of that. So.
Oh, that's so sweet. We'll be right back. Incentives work. They work in healthcare. Think about it. If hospitals provide free rides to patients, they show up on time for doctor's appointments. They work with kids. Teachers use incentives to encourage academic achievement. Hope for Henry unites these truths to ignite the power of incentives to help pediatric patients do the things they need to do to get better. Hope for Henry's procedure-based incentive program, Super Rewards for Super Kids, works every day at hospitals around the country. Child life specialists are trained to use this program, and they are reporting that 58% of their patients don't need sedation for certain procedures, and 95% of children using Super Rewards have an overall improved patient experience. Kids at hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic, Inova Children's Hospital, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and many more are feeling more cooperative and less anxious and having a better patient experience because of Super Rewards, a state-of-the-art incentive program. To learn more about Hope for Henry, check out their website at hopeforhenry.org and bring Super Rewards to your hospital. Follow Hope for Henry and contact them through social media at Hope for Henry. Well, let's talk a little bit about that kind of worst case scenario that you guys got thrown into that you weren't quite expecting to and how you were able to handle it all.
Sure. So Spina Bifida and Hydrocephalus, there's like all these shifting in the brain. I would say that Toby's like cerebellum, his cerebrum, all of the pieces and parts of his brain are kind of the wrong shapes and sizes. So thankfully, I was a little bit mentally prepared, but so let me back up. So he was in the hospital about 8 days, and he was doing great. Like all the things that we wanted to happen, all the things we prayed for. He was eating well. He was going to the bathroom well. He was, nursing well. And so then I take him home, and our boys were with my parents out of state for, some of that transition time. And then they came home, and that weekend was really crazy, really hard. So one of the things we had to do is we had to use a catheter to empty his bladder like every 3 hours. So I'm trying to nurse, right, every 2 to 3 hours. We're doing this. Sometimes those two things did not coincide. So I was a very sleep deprived mama. And we were home, and I remember like they send you home with this binder of all these doctors you're going to see. And they talk about all the signs of a shunt failing, which are projectile vomiting and sleeping a lot, and the fontanelle, or like the soft spot, being really swollen. And of course, like with a new baby, they're spitting up, they're sleeping all the time, they're crying.
Right.
You just don't know, right?
Yeah.
And you're just going through all this stuff. So anyway, so we were home, and 11 days after he was discharged, I noticed that he started making noise when he was breathing. It's called stridor. And he was projectile vomiting. I could tell he had reflux. So I was a nursing major in college, and then I switched to education, but all my friends were nursing majors. So I'm calling my college roommate who her babies had really bad reflux. And I'm asking her all these questions because I'm trying, it's not my first rodeo. I've been a mom for a couple of years, and I'm trying not to panic and all this stuff. And it did not occur to me that I needed to take my baby to the ER, to the emergency room.
Yeah.
And so we did. So I take him back, and we kind of joked that he sounded like a baby pterodactyl when he was breathing. And I think some of that was just a coping mechanism for us at the time.
Yeah.
Because we didn't realize how bad it was. So we took him in, and he got admitted, and they thought he had RSV, which is, the respiratory virus that babies get. But I knew in the back of my mind that he was having some symptoms of what they call a Chiari-2 malformation. So all babies with Spina Bifida, if they have hydrocephalus, they have varying levels of this Chiari-2 malformation in the brain. And 4 days into the hospital, his vocal cords were paralyzed. He was aspirating. He was refluxing. They put in an NG tube, so a nasal feeding tube. And I'm devastated because all I wanted to do was be able to nurse my baby.
Yeah.
And, and he's of course got a huge wound on his back, and we're dealing with that. Well, 4 days in, his sodium drops to really low levels. He should have been having seizures, and he ends up in the pediatric intensive care unit. For the next 30 days, we rode this roller coaster of he would be on a CPAP mask, and he would do okay for a couple of days, and then they would move him to oxygen on a nasal cannula, and he would code, and then we would ride the roller coaster again. And finally, the doctors came in the middle of this, like his shunt failed. Of course, he's not regulating his body temperature. All this crazy stuff is happening. And finally, the doctors came in, and they said, we need to talk about a trach. We need to talk about a feeding tube. And I just remember, we relied on our faith a lot. But I just remember thinking, I've got to take this one day at a time. Sometimes it literally was 1 minute at a time. I am a long-term type A planner. We even planned his birthday to be before the end of the year so we would get the tax credit, because my husband is a financial planner. Like, I had everything planned out, and this was something I had not planned on. And it was literally learning to live day by day, hour by hour.
Yeah.
Sometimes I didn't know where my boys were going to be the next day or who was going to take care of them as we tried to protect them. So yeah, it was tough. So
were you able to get the hang of that hour to hour pretty quickly, or was it something that took practice for a while?
I think it took practice, and some of it, well, I don't know. It's hard to think back. It was 14 years ago, but I think some of it was a little bit of both, because you're forced to. In
Right.
those situations, the doctors are scratching their heads. You don't really know. You're trying to I would reach out to then it was Yahoo group of Spina Bifida moms and dads to kind of say, has anybody else gone through this scenario? And what did you do? And, you read about, maybe they need this surgery to take skull bone out of the back of their brain. But then it just grows back. And should we put our child through this? I'm doing all this research. And you just have to learn to do that dance of research, trusting the doctors, and just, taking this one day at a time. And, when he finally came home, we were in the hospital over 2 months, and we had been in 64 days. He only weighed, I think he was like 8 pounds something, almost 3 months old, because of course, like, he just wasn't keeping his weight on and all that kind of stuff. But we brought this medically fragile baby home, and he had a trach to help him breathe. He was on a ventilator 24/7. We found out he had obstructive sleep apnea and then central sleep apnea. So when he's in a deep REM sleep, his brain doesn't tell his body to breathe. And I'll never forget moving to the step-down floor. And at first, kind of the plan was, well, he could be off the ventilator when he's awake, but we're going to put him back on the ventilator when he's sleeping. Well, of course, an infant, he was still really a newborn. They sleep all the time.
Mm.
And to this day, we have his pulmonary doctor was a fellow at the time, great, great man. And he came in and he said, I know this is going to be hard news, but we want you to go home on a ventilator all the time, because there's just so many viruses out there. We don't want him to have to work so hard to breathe that he can't grow. You do all your growing when you're sleeping, all of that. And then he was on a feeding pump 20 hours a day. So he ended up with a gastrojejunal tube,
Mm-hmm.
like in his small intestine, because they didn't want him to reflux and aspirate on any of the breast milk and, the different formula that we were feeding him and all of that. So some of that is just a blur.
Yeah. Yeah.
I look back and think, how did we survive that?
I'm sure. Oh gosh, it's not one thing, it's 1,000 things. And you're having
Yeah.
to be the person who's in charge of them all. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'd love to switch gears a little bit and see if you can kind of think back to this transition to now that he's 14 and what you know now that you wish you would have known at the beginning. And not any kind of like medical stuff, but like just that you wish your soul knew.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. I think, first of all, I wish I would have I would have known to embrace my baby and my young child as a child, as who he was, as more than all this therapy and the diagnosis. And, he went through feeding therapy. He had physical therapy. He had speech therapy, occupational therapy. He did learn to talk, even with a trach, when he started to vocalize around 3. And everything was so focused on getting him as normal as possible, learning to eat by mouth, learning to speak, learning to walk, and all of that. And I wish I could go back and tell myself to just chill.
Yeah.
Just enjoy your child. And not that we didn't have moments where we enjoyed him, but there were just so many times where I was so focused on fixing him. And sorry, I'm going to get a little teary, but I'm so focused on fixing him and making, the world see him as, this great kid who's silly and funny and loves Doritos. And he used to lick the cheese off Doritos because he couldn't chew them, enjoy all the different stages. And I also think I would go back and tell myself, like, it's okay not to have a plan. It's okay. You don't have to know, everything. You can, embrace each day and celebrate the milestones, which we did. We celebrated every milestone. I heard another podcaster call them inch stones, the tiny swallow of baby food, the checking out at the grocery store, with the baby food. Like, that was a huge deal. Wearing zip up pajamas, with the feeding tubes. You couldn't do that. And so I think it is just taking the time to celebrate all those little inch stones and not worrying about, the friend's baby who's walking and doing all this stuff. And yes, we have to grieve that stuff. I think that's probably another thing too that I would go back and tell myself is I've learned this now, 14 years later, how important it is to grieve the milestones they don't reach, the ways that they don't measure up with their peers, all of that stuff. But I think in the beginning, I didn't really understand how much grief was going to be an ongoing part of this journey. He was about 5 when I finally realized that, but that it's okay. And also to just kind of like, it's going to sound strange, but embrace the grieving process, because there's healing in lamenting the heart of your journey.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. There's healing in the lamenting of the heart of your journey.
Yeah.
I'd love to know how you've seen, especially his older brothers, kind of grow up through this process. Of course, they were little. They were 3 and 18 months when he was born. And so they, that it's their brother. And there's just, that's that. But I'd love to know a story or an example of how the brothers have, and his little sister too, been an advocate for him or a relationship with him, and what is it like for them as your 4 kiddos together as siblings?
Yeah. So I'm going to get really real here and tell you that I look back now and see in some cases where we probably protected our older 2 boys too much, meaning we took them out of the situations, at the hospital. And not that you want your kids to be at the hospital all the time, but just Toby's had almost 60 surgeries in 14 years. So we have been in and out of the hospital a lot. And I can look now because my older boys are 18 and 16, and they do have a good relationship with Toby. They do. And they're normal siblings. That's probably the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they treat him like a normal brother. They fight, they argue,
Yeah.
they tell Toby to, suck it up and unload the dishwasher. I mean, my 16-year-old and him were having an argument earlier about the proper way to load the dishwasher. I mean, they are normal siblings. And
the siblings help you keep it real, right?
They do. They totally do. But I also wish, so one part of our journey is that we've always had in-home nursing. And I think in some ways it was a good thing because it made me be able to balance the, I could still go to soccer with our older kids, and we could still not have all of Toby's medical things turn their life upside down. So they felt like they were missing out. That was a big thing for me. I didn't want them to ever resent him because they missed out on things, because we had an emergency or Toby can't do that activity. He's in a wheelchair full time. He can't do that activity. So the nurses have helped make their journey more normal, I guess. Or just so they're not missing out. But on the other hand, and I don't know if it's just because of their personalities or what, but they're not, I feel like I did not make them, I didn't bring them into his care as much as I should have, if that makes sense. I did not include them in, doing this with him and explaining this part and this surgery. And some of that I think is just because I had 3 kids, 3 and under, and I was just trying to survive,
Oh gosh,
those
yes, for
early
sure.
years. Um, and I will say it also, it depends on their personality. Like our second son, he just has a more nurturing, empathetic personality, and he has no problem with doing some of the medical care, like suctioning. We've trained him how to do some of the stuff. The things that Toby, can't do himself because he's gotten really independent through the years. And then going on to our daughter, she, sometimes it's funny because they have a really fun relationship. In some ways, Toby is very much his age. He's 14. But in some other ways, he's still a little bit younger. Like he likes to pretend or watch, our daughter, play with her stuffed animals or do things. And they just have this sweet friendship, of course, where they argue. And I think Karis, our daughter, she'll kind of mother him a little bit,
Yeah.
In some ways she had to grow up a little bit faster than I wanted her to, but I do know that they do have this empathy, and I'm sorry, I can talk all day, but I do want to share just one thing real quick. Like, so we have a family that we have grown up with, and that we knew this couple before either of us were married, and their oldest son has a trach, a ventilator, and a feeding tube, right? This is crazy. So he and Toby are about 3.5 years apart because he was actually born 16 hours before our oldest son in the
Oh,
same
wow.
hospital. We had our babies at the exact same time.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. So our oldest, I love him. He just has a real type A kind of business personality. And so he's not always super nurturing with his brother, but when he's with his friend who really can't use his hands, I see him getting his drink out and giving him a drink.
Oh.
And, they just have this amazing friendship. And I know it's because of his brother and then his friend and the journey that we've had together over the last 18 years. So.
Oh, it actually makes complete sense, because when it's your brother, it's like, oh, I have to do this. And if it's your friend, it's like, I'm choosing to do this because I can and I know how. And, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your family just sounds so amazing. And I really do appreciate you keeping it so real about that, because I think, first of all, you never know how to handle something, and it's so easy. It's like they say the best parents are the ones that aren't parents yet, right? It's like you're an expert at everything before you go through it, and then it's like, what? But you have that like innate ability to protect your kids, and that means shielding them sometimes. And it's like, when's too much, when's too little, and you're in this constant struggle. So you're definitely not alone in looking back and thinking, of course we would handle things differently looking back. I think it's like,
sure,
where do you grow from there, right? Like from here on out, like what do we do if we want to do things differently or we don't, whatever worked. And I have one last question for you, which is the hardest and the easiest question at the same time.
Okay.
And I would love to know what Toby has taught you since he entered your life.
Oh, there's so much I could say. I think he has taught me just true joy and how to embrace the hard of life with just perseverance and courage. And, my son is verbal. Toby he can talk, he can have a normal conversation. A lot of some of the medical stuff is healed over time. He doesn't need his ventilator when he's awake. And, he eats, he can have normal meals with us. And he just has overcome so much. And he just had a major surgery a few months ago. And we actually had a follow-up appointment yesterday. And the nurse practitioner looked at him and she said, you you have recovered from this surgery the fastest I've ever seen anyone recover from this surgery.
Oh, wow.
And he just attacks life with just courage and perseverance and of course he struggles, of course he has fear and we go into surgery and we need child life to help us. We need all of those things to help us get through these hard things.
Of course.
But he always has a smile on his face. He is always ready to tell you a joke. And he's also just extremely, yes, he does. And he's just also just very loving. He's crazy affectionate, always hugging me. And, and just always, I think, just grateful. Like, I think that's another thing he's taught me is just to be grateful for every day, be grateful for the tiny things, just to look for those tiny inch stones, those tiny, and whereas like I used to just always be so concerned about tomorrow. And again, not that I still don't have my planners, I still got them, they're there, but he has taught me just how to just embrace today and to take this one step at a time, one day at a time, and to enjoy everything, because we have had moments where we've been at Disney and we've ended up in the emergency department. It's another thing that was on my unbucket list that happened,
Yeah.
And so I just had to learn I'm going to enjoy today. Tomorrow may hold something really hard, so I'm going to enjoy today and embrace today and be grateful for today.
Oh, I think that's such a beautiful lesson. And the fact that you get to live with that, beautiful boy that teaches you so much. And man, he just sounds so awesome. And I can't thank you enough for sharing so much of the hard stuff and also what you've, learned throughout the time. I think you offer a lot of perspective for those families who are in the beginning stages, and I think that's the whole purpose of this podcast, for those families who are feeling so lost at the beginning to hear somebody like you, the most beautiful lessons in life you've gotten since that 20-week ultrasound.
Yeah.
And maybe in that moment, you don't think that that's the way it's going to turn out.
For sure.
Well, if our followers and listeners want to connect or follow along with you, how can they do that?
Sure. So I can be found at Carrie M for Michelle Holt.com. And I also co-host a podcast called Take Heart Special Moms. And we are found on all the major podcast avenues, and we're also found at takeheartspecialmoms.com. So that's where we are. That's where I'm found on my personal website, and I speak and write, and then but a lot of our energy has gone into this. There's 3 of us, so counting myself, but into this joint podcast called Take Heart.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And I know everyone will want to go listen to more of you and what you offer. And I just appreciate you being here today so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.